This is a slightly longer poem that I really enjoy. It's by Kenneth Koch, often associated with the Beat movement, somewhat unfairly, I think. But anyway, moving on. It's called Variations on a Theme by William Carlos Williams. I chopped down the house that you had been saving to live in next summer. I am sorry, but it was morning, and I had nothing to do, and its wooden beams were so inviting. We laughed at the hollyhocks together, and then I sprayed them with lye. Forgive me. I simply do not know what I am doing. I gave away the money that you'd been saving to live on for the next 10 years. The man who asked for it was shabby, and the firm March wind on the porch was so juicy and cold. Last evening, we went dancing, and I broke your leg. Forgive me. I was clumsy, and I wanted you here in the wards, where I am the doctor. Can I read a poem to you?
Read me a poem, John.
Hank, today's poem comes to you from George Bilger. You liked the funny poem last week so much that I thought I would read you this one. You've heard it before, but boy, do I like it. It's called The Return of Odysseus. You're familiar with the Odyssey, right, Hank?
Yeah, I've heard of it. Did they make it into a movie? Was it a movie?
The too long didn't read version of the Odyssey is that after a number of years at war, Odysseus goes home, but it takes him like 20 years to go home, hence it being an Odyssey. All right, Hank, so here is The Return of Odysseus by George Bilger. When Odysseus finally does get home, he is understandably upset about the suitors who have been mooching off his wife for 20 years, drinking his wine, eating his mutton, etc. In a similar situation today, he would seek legal counsel, but those were different times. With the help of his son Telemachus, he slaughters roughly 110 suitors and quite a number of young ladies, although in view of their behavior, I use the term loosely. Rivers of blood course across the palace floor. I too have come home in a bad mood. Yesterday, for instance, after the department meeting, when I ended up losing my choice parking spot behind the library to the new provost. I slammed the door. I threw down my book bag in this particular way I have perfected over the years that lets my wife understand the contempt I have for my enemies, which is prodigious. And then, with great skill, she built a gin and tonic that would have pleased the very gods, and with epic patience she listened as I told her of my wrath, and of what I intended to do to so-and-so, and also to what's-his-name. And then there was another gin and tonic, and presently my wrath abated and was forgotten, and peace came to reign once more in the great halls and courtyards of my house. The Return of Odysseus by George Bilger. One of my favorite poems, largely because of its last word. In the great halls and courtyards of my house. Not my home, not my palace, my house. The least pretentious word he could have chosen in that moment. Beautifully, beautifully written poem. Hank, would you like a short poem for today?
Is your short poem about 2D glasses?
It is not. It is about grief.
Okay, sure.
Sorry to ruin your day. It's by Raymond Carver. It's called Grief. Woke up early this morning and from my bed looked far across the strait to see a small boat moving through the choppy water, a single running light on. Remembered my friend who used to shout his dead wife's name from hilltops around Perugia, who set a plate for her at his simple table long after she was gone and opened the windows so she could have fresh air. Such display I found embarrassing. So did his other friends. I couldn't see it. Not until this morning. Grief by Raymond Carver. I love that poem. Really gets me like just below the solar plexus.
That's a soft spot.
I can tell that you prefer the funny poems.
I was a little bit unable to keep the train of thought on that one. My dog was being cute.
Can I tell you a poem that I think is quite funny that's 2 lines long by Ogden Nash?
Okay, sure.
I think it's actually 4 lines long. Candy is dandy, but liquor is quicker. Today's short poem is called Discoveries in Arizona by James Wright. It has one of those little notes from the author before the poem. Hank, I don't know if you know those notes, but the note is, all my life so far I have been afraid of cactus, spiders, rattlesnakes. The tall 14-year-old boy who led me through the desert whispered, "Come over this way." Picking my steps carefully over an earth strangely familiar, I found 4 small holes, large enough for a root that might have been torn out, or a black snake hole in Ohio that I hated. What is it, I said, some cute prairie dog or an abandoned post hole maybe? No, he said, she's down there with her children. She doesn't hate you. She's not afraid. She's probably asleep. She's probably keeping warm with something I don't know about. And all I know is sometimes in sunlight, two brown legs reach out. It is hard to get a look at her face. Even in the museum, she turns away. I don't know where she's looking. I have lived all my life in terror of a tarantula. This is Home is So Sad by Philip Larkin. Home is so sad. It stays as it was left, shaped to the comfort of the last to go, as if to win them back. Instead, bereft of anyone to please, it withers so, having no heart to put aside the theft and turn again to what it started as, a joyous shot at how things ought to be, long fallen wide. You can see how it was. Look at the pictures and the cutlery, the music and the piano stool, that vase. Okay, Hank, here's our poem for today. It's called The Skylight by Seamus Heaney. It's actually a recommendation by Jeremy. You were the one for skylights. I opposed cutting into the seasoned tongue and groove of pitch pine. I liked it low and closed, its claustrophobic nest-up-in-the-roof effect. I liked the snuff-dry feeling, the perfect trunk-lid fit of the old ceiling. Under there, it was all hutch and hatch. The blue slates kept the heat like midnight thatch. But when the slates came off, extravagant sky entered and held surprise wide open. For days I felt like an inhabitant of that house where the man sick of the palsy was lowered through the roof, had his sins forgiven, was healed, took up his bed, and walked away. All right, it's by E. Cummings. It's called I Thank You, God, for Most This Amazing. I thank you, God, for most this amazing day, for the leaping greenly spirits of trees and a blue true dream of sky, and for everything which is natural, which is infinite, which is yes. I, who have died, am alive again today, and this is the sun's birthday. This is the birthday of life and of love and wings, and of the gay, great, happening, illimitably earth. How should tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, breathing, any lifted from the no of all thing human, merely being doubt unimaginable you? Now the ears of my ears awake, and now the eyes of my eyes are opened. E. Cummings, a poem from, I think, the 1940s, but I'm not positive.
That was nice. Thanks for that poem, John.
Yeah, it's a good one. E. Cummings, specializes in the poetry of surprisingly optimistic. That would be my description of E. Cummings' poetry. Hank, would you like a short poem for today?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, give me a short poem, John.
I've been holding on to this one, Hank. It's a single line of perfect iambic pentameter, the last will and testament of John Keats, the great British romantic poet. My chest of books divide among my friends.
Are we done? Was that?
That's the poem. That is his entire last will and testament. My chest of books divide among my friends.
Well, at least we got to the death quick.
Yes, he knew he was dying when he wrote that. Another great line of iambic pentameter that Keats wrote in his diaries. He'd been taking care of his brother who had tuberculosis, and Keats began coughing, and he coughed up some blood. And near the drop of blood in his diary, he wrote, "This drop of blood, it spells my death."
Wow.
I guess that's actually a line of iambic quadrameter, but
Oh, man.
Still pretty dark. I too dislike it. Reading it, however, with a perfect contempt for it, one discovers in it, after all, a place for the genuine. Poetry by Marianne Moore. By the time you swear you're his, shivering and sighing, and he vows his passion is infinite, undying, lady, make a note of this. One of you is lying.
Oh, dang.
Dorothy Parker. Unfortunate coincidence. Oh, sweet spontaneous earth, how often have the doting fingers of prurient philosophers pinched and poked thee? Has the naughty thumb of science prodded thy beauty? How often have religions taken thee upon their scraggy knees, squeezing and buffeting thee that thou mightest conceive gods? But true to the incomparable couch of death, thy rhythmic lover, thou answerest them only with spring. The E. Cummings poem, often known as "Oh Sweet Spontaneous," as that is its first line. But yes, sweet spontaneous life that only gives us spring. We want more, but spring is what we get in this world, Hank. Sweet day, so cool, so calm, so bright, the bridal of the earth and sky. The dew shall weep thy fall tonight, for thou must die. Sweet rose, whose hue angry and brave bids the rash gazer wipe his eye, thy root is ever in its grave, and thou must die. Sweet spring, full of sweet days and roses, a box where sweets compacted lie, my music shows ye have your closes, and all must die. Only a sweet and virtuous soul, like seasoned timber, never gives, but though the whole world turn to coal, then chiefly lives. Virtue by George Herbert. I'm so good at last names. Oh, it was a poem from the 17th century, Hank. I feel like we don't have enough 17th century poems about death on this podcast.
Poem was also about life, and it was also not short.
Can I read you a short poem?
Yeah, okay.
It's poem 202. That's how it's usually known. Faith is a fine invention for gentlemen who see, but microscopes are prudent in an emergency. An interesting thing about this poem is that it's sort of like translated differently.
Oh yeah.
Like sometimes it's written as faith is a fine invention for gentlemen who see, and then other times it's written as faith is a fine invention when gentlemen can see.
How is Emily Dickinson's work translated when she wrote in English?
The answer is that I don't know. But the probable answer is that because Emily Dickinson's poems were written in drafts and many were never published, or when they were published in highly edited form, it's probable that one of those is the highly edited, non-ideal, Emily Dickinson herself form. He Tells Her by Wendy Cope. Are you familiar with this poem?
I don't think so.
It's the world's best poem about mansplaining. Are you familiar with mansplaining?
I sure am.
Okay. This is called He Tells Her by Wendy Cope. He tells her that the earth is flat. He knows the facts, and that is that. In altercations fierce and long, she tries her best to prove him wrong. But he has learned to argue well. He calls her arguments unsound and often asks her not to yell. She cannot win. He stands his ground. The planet goes on being round.
Boom! Drop the mic.
It is indeed a boom-worthy poem, Hank. I think boom is the only response to that great poem, He Tells Her, by Wendy Cope.
Oh, yeah.
This is by Emily Dickinson. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never, in extremity, it asked a crumb of me. Hope is the thing with feathers. It's just one of my all-time favorite poems, Hank. Emily Dickinson. That she knew how to write a word. She knew which words to pick.
I think that's basically the whole thing of poetry. That's I've heard that thing about hope being a thing with feathers, which I assume is either a bird or a dinosaur.
I don't think that they knew that dinosaurs were feathered in Emily Dickinson's day, so I think it's probably a bird. But, you know, the author is dead. Poems belong to their readers. You can read it how you wish. What I love about that poem, though, is that it talks about the inexhaustibility of hope, and how hope never asks anything from you and is sort of always available. I mean, Emily Dickinson, at least in some of her poetry, seems to believe in this idea of radical hope that's core to a lot of religious traditions, this idea that hope is available to everyone at all times, even to the dead, which is really interesting to me. So I just love this poem. It's one that I come back to over and over again.
First I want to say to all of our science people out there, yes, I know that birds are technically dinosaurs, and I just had to say that so that you weren't going to yell at me on Twitter. Second, I think that Hope might be a velociraptor.
Hope is
available to everyone, even the dead.
Hope is the velociraptor with feathers. It doesn't roll off the tongue.
And as they say in our hometown, don't forget to be awesome.